Or the second line from the bottom of Ois Gimel, from the bottom of the page. Okay, so, Bekitzer, we said in HaBaim Yashresh Yaakov, the Tzemach Tzedek brought two Pirushim. The Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says HaBaim Yashresh Yaakov means HaBaim when Yidden come to Eretz Yisrael in the times of Mashiach. Yashresh Yaakov, the Sheirish HaNeshama will be Nimshach Begili. The second interpretation that the Tzemach Tzedek brought is that HaBaim Yashresh Yaakov, the Sheirish of Yaakov, Yaakov taking root, refers to doing mitzvahs. And in this taich of Yashresh Yaakov, that taking root means doing mitzvahs, so there was two ways. The way that the Tzemach Tzedek explained that the hashrasha of Yaakov, the way Yaakov takes root, the way Yaakov gets roots, Yidden get roots, is through doing mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are gashmias, it's a physical act, and in that physical act, the Yaakov, the Yidden get their roots. In Teira'er, the Alter Rebbe also says Yashresh Yaakov referring to mitzvahs, but in a different way, that the mitzvahs are Yashresh Yaakov, they get their roots in Yaakov. Mitzvahs is a high Eir Elyon, a Eir Eleki, a godly light, and they get their sheirish, their hashrasha, they're planted, they take root in a Jewish person. And Alter Rebbe said, what does it mean, HaBaim Yashresh Yaakov? That through Golos, and specifically the mitzvahs that are done during Golos, bring about this Maila of Hashrasha, bring about this Hamshacha, this Gili through mitzvahs. And it's mainly through Golos, because the Giluyim, the La'asad Lavai, the result of mitzvahs, the Yatzet Parach Yisrael, the end of the pasuk that refers to the growth and the blossoming that result from the mitzvahs, is mainly through HaBaim Yashresh Yaakov, through the mitzvahs that are done Bisman HaGolos, HaBaim coming to Golos, and like it says in Tanya that the Giluyim, the La'asad Lavai, the Giluyim that will happen when Mashiach comes are Talui b'maseinu v'avedaseinu shebizman HaGolos. They result primarily from the Aveda, from our mitzvahs in the time of Golos. So therefore, which Yashresh Yaakov, which Hashrasha, which mitzvahs specifically bring about the Yatzet Parach, the Giluyim of Lasad Lavi, is HaBaim, the mitzvahs during our coming to Mitzrayim, during our coming to Golos. And he explained in the Maamar, not just Golos Mitzrayim, but Golos now also. That was the Alter Rebbe. So the question was, the Alter Rebbe, in explaining Yashresh Yaakov, that it goes on mitzvahs, the way mitzvahs take root in Yidden. So the Kiyum HaMitzvahs is mainly during the time of Golos, and therefore he also explained the word HaBaim. The Tzemach Tzedek also says Yashresh Yaakov goes on mitzvahs. The way Yidden get the, but he doesn't connect it with the word HaBaim. So to explain that, that's what we're in the middle of. The Rebbe is explaining the inyan of mitzvahs. There's two explanations for the advantage of mitzvahs over Torah. One is that mitzvahs reach higher. Mitzvahs are mamshech a higher air. Torah brings down from chachmasa yisbarach, from the beginning of ishtalshlus, and mitzvahs bring down from higher than ishtalshlus. That's one difference. The second difference is that mitzvahs accomplish the idea of ishapcha chashechel and nehira. The actual refinement of the guf and nefesh habahamis is more through mitzvahs than through Torah. Torah is a ruchnistic aveda, but mitzvahs is done begashmis with physical objects, with the gashmistic world, and therefore mitzvahs transforms darkness to light. These are two different advantages of mitzvahs over Torah. So we're explaining in this ice, in these two milas, there's a difference between when they're mainly present. The mila of mitzvahs, that mitzvahs bring down a higher air than Torah, that mitzvahs are mamshech higher than ishtalshlus, that's more by the time of the Beis Hamikdash than Bisman HaGolos. That's mainly true, not about the mitzvahs during the time of Golos. So we explained yesterday, in the end, last time, the reason for that is the mila of mitzvahs is mainly because mitzvahs possess the mila of bittul. Torah is understanding, it's connected with the person's chushim, with the person's faculties, with the person's abilities. It's not bittul. Mitzvahs is bittul, doesn't involve our mitzvahs. Doing a mitzvah is an act of bittul. And it's the bittul that reaches the higher than mitzvahs the lamayla, higher than ishtalshus. A person's mitzvahs reaches levels of air. A person's bittul reaches higher than ishtalshus. That advantage of mitzvahs, that mitzvahs reaches higher because mitzvahs is done with a bittul, is more present bisman Beis HaMikdash. Because when is bittul a real bittul? In the time of the Beis HaMikdash. True bittul has to come from sensing Elokus. And that's what we said, the bisman HaGolos, we say in davening, Einanu yechelim lalis v'leirois l'shtachavos.
It is natural, so not a finish.
Einachanami. That's what he said. Bittul bisman habayis is not a chiddush, but it's a more all-encompassing bittul. It's a more real bittul. Bittul has the definition that there isn't any other existence besides the Eibishter. That's in the bittul in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. The time of Golos, it's a chiddush tike bittul. We're being mevatel ourselves. But even after the bittul, our mitzias is still there. It doesn't have that mile of bittul that there's no other existence, that there's no remnant of the person's mitzias. So the mitzvahs in the time of the Beis HaMikdash is performed in a way that there is an all-encompassing bittul. Because then there was lalos v'leirois, the person saw and sensed and experienced Elokus. There's no remnant of the person's self, of his identity. And therefore that was a real bittul that reached a higher air. So regarding the bittul of mitzvahs, this is there more in the mitzvahs that are done in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. There's no advantage in the mitzvahs that are done in the time of Golos. Our mitzvahs that we do now, when we're not able to reach this bittul, are secondary, are in a lower level than in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. That's all when we talk about disadvantage of mitzvahs. Now the second last line on the page, and Ois Gimel. In contrast to that, the other advantage in mitzvahs over Torah, that mitzvahs have the accomplishment more than Torah, of ishapcha chasheichel in Torah, of actually transforming darkness to light, because mitzvahs actually deal with darkness, with the guf and nefesh habahamis, and with the physical objects in the world. Because in this hapcha chasheichel in Torah shaydei kiyam mitzvahs, the other advantage in mitzvahs, the mitzvahs change over the cheshech itself. Who beikar bisman hagolos, that factor, that aspect of mitzvahs is more present, is more true about the mitzvahs that are done during the time of golos. Ki hacheshech de haguf hanefesh ude nefesh habahamis ude ha'elam k'mei shehem begolos hu cheshech gadol yeser me'acheshech shalahem k'mei shehem mitzad atzmam. The darkness of anything, of the guf, of us, of the things with which we're doing the mitzvahs, is a much greater darkness in the time of Golos, the time of the Beis HaMikdash. The cheshech wasn't so intense. The advantage, the maila of ishapcha chasheichel and nahira, that the darkness itself is transformed, is changed to light, that maila is obviously greater, the greater the darkness is. So the mitzvahs that we do in the time of Golos, that are transforming a much more intense darkness to light, have this advantage in a much greater measure. Because in the Golos, he said the cheshech is a greater cheshech. The darkness is a more intense darkness. Kiyum ha-mitzvahs b'zman ha-Golos, and dafka through the mitzvahs that we do now during Golos, that when we do mitzvahs in the Golos, we're refining, we're transforming, we're changing over this greater darkness of the guf and nefesh habahamis in the state that they're in Golos, when they're much more dark. We're changing over this darkness to light, so it's a much greater ishapcha chasheichel nahira. So the maila of mitzvahs, that mitzvahs reach a higher level of elokus, which is a result of the bittul that's contained in mitzvahs, that maila, that advantage is more present, is more true in the mitzvahs that were done in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. The maila of mitzvahs, that mitzvahs change over the darkness itself, that's much more true when the mitzvahs that we do during Golos. Now, coming back to the seeming contradiction. Sometimes we say in Tanya, it says, in Perek Lamed Zayin, that the Rebbe brought down at the beginning of the Maamar, that the Giluyim of La'asad Lavi, the Giluyim of Mashiach, the words of the Alter Rebbe are Tali b'maseinu v'avedaseinu shebizman haGolos. They result from and they're dependent on the mitzvahs that we do in Golos. In other places, the Rebbe is going to say the Tzemach Tzedek's Maamar, is based on the contrary. The Giluyim of La'asad Lavi are dependent on mitzvahs always, on any mitzvahs, on all the mitzvahs that precede Mashiach, but not just specifically in the time of Golus. Is it dafka mitzvahs in the time of Golus that bring about the Giluyim La'asad Lavi, or any mitzvahs? So the Rebbe is going to say it depends. Now that we established there's two different milas, there's two different advantages in mitzvahs. There's two aspects to the results of mitzvahs, to the giluyim that come from the mitzvahs, the blossoming, the yatzitz uparach Yisrael that comes from mitzvahs. So therefore it depends what we're talking about. That's the standard answer. Chassidus events depends what we're discussing. So it depends which aspect of mitzvahs that we're referring to. On that depends, are we focusing on the mitzvahs mainly in the time of Golus, or on the contrary, we're focusing dafka specifically, primarily on the mitzvahs in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. He said, V'hinei, la'asid lavei, when Mashiach comes, yehagilui d'shnei ha'inyanim hanal shebekiyam ha'mitzvahs. Then will be the blossoming, the gilui, the revelation of both advantages, of both results, both outcomes, both growths that come from the mitzvahs that we do now. The gilui ha'amshacha shaydekiyam ha'mitzvahs atzma, then will be begilui, then we'll see the result of the mitzvahs, the way they draw down the eir that's higher than ishtalshlus, the higher eir liki, that results from the fact that mitzvahs have the attribute of bittul. And also, la'asad lavi will be v'gilui ha'amshacha sha'idei ha'birur v'eshapcha shenasa idei ha'mitzvah. Then will be begilui, then will be visible the result and the outcome of the fact that the mitzvah has this accomplishment, achievement of transforming the cheshach ta'ir. V'yesh leimar. So now, because there's two benefits, so to speak, two accomplishments that we'll see la'asad lavi as a result of the mitzvahs, so depending which one we're talking about, on that depends whether we're referring primarily to the mitzvahs in the time of Golus or primarily to the mitzvahs in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Now specifically, v'yesh leimar, dezeh shekosov b'Tanya. That it says in Tanya, shagiluyim de la'aseh, that the giluyim that happen when Mashiach comes, tluyim, are dependent and are resulting b'maseinu v'avedaseinu shebizman hagolus, on the mitzvahs specifically that we do during the time of Golus, even more than the mitzvahs that we do in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. The reason for that is ki b'Tanya sham, in Tanya there in general, in those prakim, meduber, what's being discussed, what Alter Rebbe is speaking about, is beha'iloi de'ishapcha chashecha l'nehera, about the advantage of changing darkness to light, that will reach its epitome, that will reach its ultimate la'asad lavi in the times of Mashiach. The advantage of Yisrein ha'eir HaBaim ha'cheshach, the advantage of a light, of a gilui that comes from darkness itself being transformed to light. And that will reach its ultimate, the ultimate changing darkness to light will be when Mashiach comes. And so there, where the Alter Rebbe is speaking about that aspect, that factor of the darkness that was changed to light, and how great that is, and how that reaches its ultimate when Mashiach comes, and how that comes from our mitzvahs, which part of our mitzvahs brings to this ultimate of changing darkness to light is mainly the mitzvahs in the time of Golus, when we're dealing with a bigger darkness, like we said. Vagilui de'oyer zeh she'yeh la'ased, this aspect of mitzvahs, this achievement of mitzvahs that will be when Mashiach comes, of the maila, of the advantage of Yisrein ha'eir HaBaim ha'cheshach, of the power of changing darkness to light that's in mitzvahs, totally that's mainly dependent and resulting be'ikar, primarily b'maseinu v'avedaseinu shebizman hagolus. Like we said, this advantage of mitzvahs, of changing darkness, is mainly in the golus when we reach a bigger darkness. But there's another aspect to mitzvahs. V'zeh shela'ased lavi yehagilui de'orein seif sheba mitzvahs atzmam. That la'ased lavi will see the result that the mitzvahs themselves, being an expression of the Eibishter, bring down alikus, because the mitzvah is godliness, and we'll see the hamshacha, the drawing down of godliness in the mitzvah itself. Tali beikir b'maseinu v'avedaseinu shebizman hagolus. That's more dependent on the shebizman habayis. That's more dependent on the mitzvahs we do in the Beis Hamikdash, where the mitzvah reaches a higher level of godliness because it has a greater measure of bittul. So therefore, the point of the explanation is going to explain us after we elaborate on it. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe in Tanya and in Teira is speaking about that aspect of mitzvahs, that koyach, that advantage of mitzvahs that they change darkness to light, which is mainly true about the mitzvahs that are done during the time of Golus. And therefore, in the Alter Rebbe's explanation of HaBaim, Yashresh, Yaakov, the way the pasuk is referring to mitzvahs that bring to the Yatzitz Uparach Yisrael, that bring to the growth Lasad Lavei, he also explains the word HaBaim to mean coming to Golus, to be referring to the mitzvahs that we do during the time of Golus, because this aspect of mitzvahs is true, in fact, mainly about the mitzvahs during the time of HaBaim, during the Golus. The Tzemach Tzedek, who also is speaking about the mitzvahs, the planting of mitzvahs that bring to Agili the Las Lavi, does not translate the word HaBaim, doesn't explain it as referring mainly to the mitzvahs Bizman HaGolus, because the Tzemach Tzedek is discussing the other aspect of mitzvahs that's not limited to the time of Golus. On the contrary, it's mainly about the time of mainly true about the mitzvahs during the time of the Beis Hamikdash. So it's not appropriate in the Tzemach Tzedek's Maamar to give that interpretation that Abba means the time of the Golus. But first we're going to have to elaborate on this, and then we'll be able to explain why, in fact, is the Tzemach Tzedek referring, or where do we see that the Tzemach Tzedek is referring to the other aspect of mitzvahs. This is just the nekuda of the explanation. But first we have to see a very interesting ha'ara here. So ha'ara 32. He said in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says that the Giluyim de la'asid lavei are dependent on maseinu v'avedaseinu shebizman hagolus, on the mitzvahs we do in the time of Golus. Why specifically the mitzvahs we do in the time of Golus? So the Rebbe said because the Alter Rebbe is speaking about that advantage of changing chayshach to eir, changing darkness to light, which is more present in the time of Golus when there's a bigger darkness. Why? Because this that the Alter Rebbe said, Magiluyim de la'asid lavei, is totally b'maseinu v'avedaseinu shebizman hagolus, is in the beginning of Perek Lamed Zayin. What is the context that's before? He says, Re'ei Tanya Perek Lamed Vav. Look before, in the Perek before, what are we discussing? Which advantage is being discussed? There the Alter Rebbe says in the Perek before, there the Alter Rebbe is speaking how the ultimate goal, the ultimate purpose of everything is not the higher Elames, the ultimate purpose is Elam Haza Tachtin, is this physical world. And the Alter Rebbe says there in Perek Lamed Vav, the reason for that, Hu lefi sheba Elam Zed Dafka in Elam Haza, as opposed to higher Elames, is Hape Chasheicha L'Nahera, you have the advantage of changing chayshach to eir, changing darkness to light, v'yisrein ha'eir min ha'chayshach, and the advantage of a light that came from transforming darkness to light. So Alter Rebbe here in Perek Lamed Vav is speaking about this maila, this advantage of ishapcha, of changing darkness to light. Following that in Perek Lamed Zayin, in that context, he says the Giluyim D'Lasad Lavei are taloi, are dependent in Maseinu v'Avedaseinu shebizman hagolus, because this aspect, when we're dealing with this maila of ishapcha, that's more true bizman hagolus. Uregam Seif Perek Lamed Zayin. The Rebbe sends us also to the end of Perek Lamed Zayin. In other words, this context is both, if we look in the Perek before and in the end of this same Perek, that there again the Alter Rebbe speaks about the advantage of liyes leis parich dira b'tachteinim dafka, that the Eibishter wanted a dira b'tachteinim le'ahapcha chasheicha l'nahera. And the Alter Rebbe says, what's the dira b'tachteinim? Through that the darkness is changed to light, that this is the dira b'tachteinim that the Eibishter wanted. And now the Rebbe makes a very basic, fundamental point. We know in Chassidus, it explains that in Sfarim we find a number of explanations of why the Eibishter created the world. And Chassidus shows all those explanations are not the ultimate explanation. They're not the real explanation. What's the real explanation is what we see in the Medrash, Nis'ava HaKadosh Baruch Hu liyis le'yisbarich dira b'tachtenim. The Eibishter wanted a dira b'tachtenim. And like the Lashon the Alter Rebbe says, afataiva is kinkashenisht. It's a desire that's irrational. It's not something that we could understand. This is what the Eibishter wanted. All the rationalizations for why there's a world, those are on levels where we can understand. Those are not the ultimate reason. The ultimate reason is described as nis'avet, to express the fact that it's beyond our reason. We can't understand it. That's what did the Eibishter want? That we know. He wanted a dira b'tachtenim. But it's not something that we can explain why, what's special, what's the advantage. It's nis'ava, afatayves kinkashenisht. Fine. So we always associate, whenever we speak about dira b'tachtenim, that's the nis'ava HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Rebbe, but here in Tanya, he's also speaking about dira b'tachtenim and explaining it different than the usual explanation. Seemingly, we have to say, Shabir Shabekama Mekemis, the above mentioned explanation, which is in Samach Vav and in a number of places. The Nis'ava Hulamay Lamitam, that this Lashon Nis'ava HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem desired, is to bring out the fact that the Eibishter's Ratzon, his desire for a world, and for Adira B'tachtenim is beyond reason, is not something we could rationalize. Va'abir Shabetanya Sham, and what it says there in Tanya, Heim B'shtei Dagas. These are two different explanations that are on two different levels.
You could have a taiva that's rational. It doesn't mean that the reason you had the taiva was because of the rationale. But post taiva you can rationalize.
True. It could come down into rationale, which means these are two different levels. If I go to the source of it, there's no rationale yet. If I speak about the reason, that's a lower level where the taiva came down and became rationalized. And the way we know that is, take away the rationalization, the taiva still remains. Right? So he says, why is Tanya different? Because Tanya is giving a reason. When the Alter Rebbe put the dira b'tachtenim and he added to that la'habcha chasheicha l'nahera, also he's not describing the dira b'tachtenim anymore as a pure irrational desire. No, the dira b'tachtenim, he wanted a certain benefit, a certain advantage, a certain gain, that in this tachtenim, in this lowly world, darkness could be transformed. There's a yisrin ha'era b'amen ha'cheshach. There's some advantage, some explainable advantage. So, at a level, there's levels where there's an explanation, but that's different than the dira b'tachtenim, than the level that he's explaining in Samach Vav, that the dira b'tachtenim was what the Eibishter desired. The nis'ava HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's afatayves kinkashenisht. Olahar me'aloshem b'tanya perek lamed vav sham. So the Rebbe is going to say, one second. What's the advantage of Ishapcha Chashech L'Nahira? Why is that a rationale? It's also something that, it's words, we're saying the words, but why should that be an advantage? It says, nevertheless, it's something that it's being described as an advantage. The Eibishter wanted that this should become in our rationale something that's advantageous. And the pasuk itself describes it, the basis of this concept. Yisrin la'er min ha'cheshach. Shlomo HaMelech says, "V'ra'isi ani sheyesh yisrin la'er min ha'cheshach ki yisrin la'chachma min ha'sichlos ki yisrin la'er min ha'cheshach." He describes it as yisrin. There's an advantage, there's a benefit to ha'er, to a light that resulted from darkness being transformed to light. The Eibishter created the world in a way, because the Eibishter wanted that there should be this advantage. But he created that this should be an advantage, this should be a maila, that darkness that's changed to light should produce a greater light than a light that didn't become from Ishapcha Chashech. But so now that this is a maila, this doesn't go together with Nis'ava HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with what we always say in Chassidus, that on a higher level you can't give any rationale for creating the world. It's just what the Eibishter desired. As soon as we give it some explanation, some benefit, some achievement, it's not the Nis'ava. What? But that's not the purpose. That's what's going to be. This purpose that dira b'tachtenim, Dir b'tachtenim is the Eibishter wanted. We could describe what's dir b'tachtenim. Ishapcha chasheichel nehera. Yeah, when you'll have the cheshechatz meyar, that is ishapcha. That's some advantage. Lahor me Allahshim b'tanya. Perek lamid vav sham. Shekach Allah b'rtzeina yisparach liyis nachas ruach lefanav yisparach kadiskafia sitra acher v'ishapech hasheichel nehera. In Tanya itself, the Alter Rebbe says, why is there something special about ishapcha? It's what the Eibishter wanted. Why should a light that came from transforming darkness to light be better? The Eibishter chose that. He wanted that. That's also resulting only because kach ola b'rtzeina yisparach. It's true, the only reason there's an advantage, there's a benefit, there's a maila in ishapcha is also because that's what the Eibishter wanted. Nevertheless, this is different than what we say, nis'ava kadosh baruch hu li yisdir b'tachtenim. Because what did the Eibishter want? It's not just he wanted ishapcha. It's he wanted that the world should be created in a way that ishapcha should be considered a benefit. That changing darkness to light should be considered a maila. So therefore, the reason why it's an advantage is because that's what the Eibishter wanted. But nevertheless, it's no longer irrational. Once the Eibishter wanted that this should be considered better, we're not dealing with it's rationalized. The zesh afal pikein zesh Allah b'rtzeini sparach u'sheyia maila ba'inyan diskafki v'sapcha. What the Eibishter chose, what the Eibishter wanted was that this should be considered a benefit. It should be considered a maila. It should be better. Okahem shechalashim b'tanya sham v'yisrin ha'ir menachesha. Like it says there in Tanya itself, that's the lashon pasuk. Yisrin ha'ir. It's the advantage, the benefit, the greatness of ha'ir that came from transforming darkness. Mashenkin ha'inyan dinis ava shalamayla mitam ha'mavur bekama mekeimes. Mashenkin, that we explain generally in Chassidus. Afatayves kinkashanish, that the only reason the Eibishter created the world was because nis'ava. What we're saying in those other places is that gam le'achrei shenis'ava liyis le'dira b'tachtenim ein maila b'adira v'nyanu rak shekach nis'ava. What we're saying always is there's no explanation. Even after the Eibishter wanted, you can't explain at all what was gained. The only achievement is because this is what the Eibishter wanted. So at that level of nis'ava, the way Dira B'Tachtenim is explained in the other places in Chassidus, that this is the Nis'ava, Fatayves Kinkasha, it's a different level than what Alter Rebbe is saying over here, that the Nis'ava is to something that can be defined and described as an achievement of gaining the inyan, the achievement of Ishapcha Chasheichel Nehira.